Hi, just a quick reminder that this podcast has merch, a Patreon, a Fiverr gig, and some affiliated links. The links to everything that I just mentioned will be in the show notes. Alright, now enjoy the show. I have to give a quick content warning in this episode. I'm going to talk about some sensitive topics. If you've listened to the first two episodes of Clara Bow's story, then you should be familiar with what those sensitive topics are. But I'm going to be discussing things like sexual assault and other forms of abuse in this episode. So, listener discretion is advised. You probably have heard someone say, "Be careful what you wish for." It is an idiom that is said, at least in America, to warn people that what they are wanting might not be what it seems, and they might not actually like what they're wishing for. It was something that the subject of this week's episode learned all too well. Hi, my name is Courtney Jewell, and you are listening to the 9th episode of the 5th season of History Shelf, a podcast about history that proves that sometimes fact is even more interesting than fiction. Welcome to Season 5 of History Shelf. This season is titled History, Taylor's version. That is because these 14 people I will be covering this season all have one thing in common. The one thing they have in common is they all have been name dropped in a Taylor Swift song. Now, don't stop listening if you are not a fellow Swiftie like me. This season is not going to be about Taylor Swift. You don't have to be a Swiftie to enjoy this season. You just have to be a history lover. So please, stay. What we are going to do is you and I are going to go on a little adventure that spans 2,404 years. Who I am going to cover this season are fearless leaders, people from the screen, poets straight from the Torture Poets department, and people who were just trying to find a place in this world. Some of these stories may be stories of happiness. They may be sad, beautiful, tragic, but long story short, I hope that you will be enchanted to get to know the stories of these historical figures all too well. So, are you ready for it? I am talking about Clara Bow one more time. This is part 3 of Clara Bow's story. So there were 2 episodes before this one about Clara Bow. And I recommend that you listen to those episodes first, but you of course don't have to. This is a recap of the 2 previous episodes. Clara Bow was born into poverty. She was her parents' 3rd child. Her 2 older sisters died shortly after their births. Her parents had a rocky marriage. Clara's mother was mentally unstable and actually tried to kill Clara when she said that she wanted to be an actress. Clara's father both physically and sexually abused her. Clara developed a stammer as a child, and other kids made fun of her for it. Clara won a talent contest, and that is how she got her start in movies. Her first couple of films did not do so well, but critics praised her work in them. She started dating a cameraman named Arthur Jacobson. Her talent got her noticed by Preferred Pictures, an independent production and distribution company. They offered her train fare to travel to Hollywood, California for a 3-month trial period at $50 a week. She took it. Clara came to Hollywood during a delicate time. Most of America was sick about the debauchery that they were seeing movie stars partake in both on and off the screen. As a result, many movie stars had moral clauses written into their contracts, but Clara didn't. Clara kept getting role after role. Sometimes she was working on up to 3 movies at a time. Clara was involved in several relationships, some at the same time. A lot of these relationships turned into scandals. Clara liked to lead a wild life, and she didn't like to hide it. This made her an outcast amongst her peers. Clara became a big star. She was the first it girl. Clara was able to make the transition from silent films to the talkies. Clara fell for the actor Rex Bell. Clara's best friend was a woman named Daisy DeVoe. Clara put Daisy in charge of her money. And last week I said that I would start this episode with telling you about a scandal that Clara and Daisy were both involved in. So that's where we'll pick up. Fame was starting to really get to Clara by 1929. She said that her nerves were shot. Photoplay magazine, a magazine that Clara did a candid interview with, an interview that I've quoted a few times, reported that there were rows of bottles of sedatives by her bed. Clara was still going great professionally, but fame often comes at a price. In 1930, Clara had another big scandal, and it involved Daisy DeVoe. Clara and Daisy had an argument about the way Daisy was handling Clara's finances and future. When Clara got famous, many people took advantage of her. I already told you how her business manager took advantage of her last week. Clara's household staff and family members also took advantage of her. This left her on the verge of bankruptcy and at the risk of foreclosure on her house in early 1929. This led Clara to hire Daisy as her personal secretary. Clara deposited her paychecks into a special account that Daisy had access to, and from that account, Daisy paid all of Clara's bills. Daisy got Clara out of financial trouble, and she even managed to get Clara $249,000 in savings. That would be over $4 million in today's money. In November of 1930, Clara was dating Rex Bell. Daisy thought that Rex was trying to steal money from Clara. Rex had talked about a get-rich-quick counterfeit racket that required a $10,000 investment. Daisy mistook the idle conversation for intrigue. So Daisy went to the California Trust Company and ordered the banker, Benjamin Odell, to rescind Clara's check-signing privilege on the special account. She told him what was going on, but he couldn't do what Daisy was asking him to do. Clara and Daisy got in an argument about this, and Clara fired Daisy. Daisy asked Clara for a severance settlement. Clara thought that Daisy was trying to blackmail her. Daisy said that she had access to all of Clara's darkest secrets. Daisy told the lawyer W.I. Gilbert, quote, "Tell Clara she can have her papers if she's willing to pay for them. Otherwise, I'm going to turn them over to the newspapers," end quote. The lawyer asked Daisy how much that she wanted for the papers. Her reply was $125,000 and not a damned nickel less, end quote. Daisy knew that Clara's career could not handle another scandal. BP told Clara that one more scandal and she was done. Daisy tried to tell Clara that she didn't want the money. What she really wanted was her job back. Rex then got the police involved. Daisy was arrested on November 6, 1930. She was interrogated for 27 straight hours. They were trying to get her to confess that she stole money from Clara, but even under that kind of duress, Daisy refused to sign a confession that stated that she stole money from Clara. Daisy was put in jail even though she hadn't been charged with anything, and she wasn't allowed to contact a lawyer. The Los Angeles District Attorney, Barone Fitz, remember him from last week? He got involved with the casino incident. Barone then raided Daisy's safe deposit box without a warrant. He was hoping to find something incriminating against her. He did not. Daisy filed a false imprisonment suit against the DA. Barone got mad, and in retaliation, he induced a grand jury to indict Daisy on 35 counts of grand theft, each carrying a 1 to 10 year sentence. The indictment was based on Daisy's alleged mishandling of funds in Clara's special account. Daisy's trial began on January 13th, 1931, and it was a big case. Thousands of people waited around the courthouse. Not only was the whole country talking about the case, but the whole world was. The assistant DA, David Clark, did his best to vilify Daisy, but in the end, the only person that the trial ended up vilifying was Clara. All the juicy details of her private life were revealed for all the world to hear. Details about Clara's drinking, all of her hookups, and the love letters that Clara made Daisy destroy were all uncovered during the trial. Daisy's lawyer, Nathan Friedman, advised her that her best defense was a defamatory offense. She needed to throw Clara to the wolves. It took the jury 3 days to come back with 34 not guilty verdicts and 1 guilty verdict. Daisy's whole trial was ridiculous. There was no way that Daisy could have stolen the money involved in the 1 grand theft count of which she was convicted of. That count related to a $825 check signed by Clara that was used to pay Clara's income taxes. The judge, another friend of Paramount executives, sentenced Daisy to 18 months of imprisonment. Before her trial, Daisy teamed up with the publisher tabloid court reporter Frederick Grimaud. And they made up some wild stories about Clara. The court reporter claimed that they got salacious details about Clara from Daisy. Details that included, but not limited to, drug use, sex with women, public sex, and even bestiality. But karma came for Frederick. He contacted Rex and offered to sell the court reporter for $25,000. Rex, acting on Clara's behalf, refused. Frederick then mailed a copy to Will Hayes. Frederick violated Section 211 of the U.S. Penal Code, which prohibited mailing, transporting, or importing anything lewd, lascivious, or obscene. He was convicted and he was sentenced to a maximum of 5 years in prison. Paramount could have saved Clara from this scandal. Remember, they had politicians in their pockets and they could have given Daisy hush money. But by this time, Clara's star was waning with the public. By this time, she was nothing new, and Paramount was just looking for a reason not to renew her contract. The weight of everything was just too much for Clara. But Clara tried to soldier on. And by soldier on, I do mean that BP bullied her into doing the film The Secret Call, even though it was clear that Clara was on the verge of a breakdown. The night before her 6 a.m. call, Rex kissed her goodnight and left. Half an hour later, Clara's housekeeper heard the sounds of screams that made her think that Clara was being beaten. What her housekeeper found was Clara crying hysterically. Clara was sobbing, "I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't," over and over again. The housekeeper called Rex and he came right over. He took Clara to Glendale Sanitarium. En route, all Clara could say was, quote, "Poor Stuart. He wanted me to be in the picture and I can't do it. I can't," end quote. The Stuart she was talking about was Stuart Walker, the director of The Secret Call. Doctors diagnosed Clara with a case of shattered nerves. They prescribed a break from films. No one from the studio was allowed to go around Clara when she was at the sanitarium. The staff didn't want anyone from Paramount to bully Clara back to work. The actress, Peggy Shannon, was recasted in The Secret Call. Clara's life was once again front page fodder. Clara's breakdown made the front page of newspapers. When her movie Kick-In was released, it opened to poor reviews and empty theaters. Paramount didn't really know what to do with Clara. In her contract, she could take 6 months off of work, but They felt that 6 months off of work for Clara would be career suicide. BP was ready to cut ties with Clara, but there was a problem. If Paramount ended her contract early, then they had to pay Clara $5,000 a week for 3 months. They didn't want to just give Clara $60,000. So BP needed to trick Clara into her being the one to get out of her contract. Clara wrote him a letter saying that she wanted to get out. So BP held a press conference in Denver and said that Clara would probably never make another picture again. BP acted like he felt guilty for holding Clara to her contract. He said that they would let her go, but he was worried about her shattered nerves. The bastard was setting up a trap for Clara, and she fell right into it. Clara told the columnist Luella Parsons that she didn't want Paramount to hold her to her contract. She said that she was unable to fulfill her obligations. Her admitting that publicly meant that Paramount did not have to pay her the $60,000. That is $1,234,494.12 in today's money. BP gloated about how he tricked Clara. Clara's contract was over. She had retired from acting at the age of 25. She returned to Paramount one day in early June to collect her things and say goodbye to the people that she had worked with for years. By then, her dressing room had already been reassigned to BP's girlfriend, Sylvia Sidney. Not many stopped by and said goodbye to Clara. One that did was Teet Carl, her publicist. As he was leaving her dressing room, Clara kissed Teet and said, quote, "That's for all you done for me," end quote. Teet blushed and left. He didn't want Clara to see him cry. Rex owned a ranch in Nevada, and Clara moved there in June. Paramount tried to create the next Clara Bow with BP's girlfriend Sylvia, but there was only one Clara Bow. Soon MGM booted Paramount out of position as the biggest film studio. And the best part? BP was fired. David Selznick said this about Clara, quote, "When Bow was at her height in pictures, we could make a story with her in it and gross $1.5 million, where another actress would gross $500,000 in the same picture and with the same cast," end quote. On December 3rd, 1931, Clara married Rex. Rex refused to marry Clara until he could support them both financially. He didn't want people to think that he married Clara for her money. The ranch they called home was not glamorous. It was a shack, and that is what they called it, the shack. It was an unpainted wooden building. It had a corrugated tin roof and no electricity, telephone, running water, plumbing, heating, or cooling. They used kerosene lamps for heat. They had an outhouse and an outdoor shower with freezing cold water from a nearby well and a rusty pipe. Clara, Rex, and his ranch hands all drank from the same tin cup attached to the shack's sole water pitcher. Clara's skin was scorched by the sun, her lips were chapped by the wind, and the 3,800 feet altitude gave her nosebleeds. The closest town to them was Searchlight, a gold mining town that had no movie theater, so Searchlight's 130 citizens had no idea that Clara was famous. It seemed as though almost all of her fans had abandoned her, but she would still receive letters from her fans to let her know that that wasn't true. She would play baseball with local children when Rex went into town. She would hunt buzzards, but no other animals. When ranch hands butchered a cow she considered a pet, she cried and vowed to become a vegetarian. The aroma of veal stew later that night made her change her mind. She would ride her horses Lucky and Andy. To Clara, it was paradise. The first transatlantic telephone call in Las Vegas history came from the Daily Mail to Clara's father's diner. Robert had opened up a diner with Clara's money, of course. He was asked if Clara and Rex had gotten married. He told them no, since he hated Rex. The press still came to the shack. Rex told them they weren't married, and so did Clara, but the press wouldn't leave them alone. So Clara said, quote, "Give us a break and let a couple of honeymooners alone. I didn't know how I'd wear in marriage. I had so little of the Rock of Gibraltar sort of thing in my life. I was afraid. He's given me the only unselfish devotion I ever had. When I was so sick and blue last spring, and he was so good to me, I fell for him like nobody's business." End quote. Clara was done with the movies, but the movies weren't done with her. Every studio in Hollywood, except for Paramount, and some studios overseas were dying to get Clara in their next film. Howard Hughes offered Clara a 3-picture deal. MGM also wanted her. She was going to star in Red-Headed Woman. She was going to do it, but the producer, Irving Thalberg, wanted her to sign a long-term contract, and Clara wasn't interested in that. Clara ended up signing a 2-picture deal with Fox. The movies she would star in would be Call Her Savage and Hoopla. Call Her Savage was the first film. Clara demanded a closed set. Fox reopened its unused Western Avenue studios for Clara. They hired John Francis Dillon, with Clara's approval, to direct the picture. She picked her ex-fiancé, Gilbert Roland, as her leading man. It was clear that Clara was nervous. Before the shooting of the film, Clara did a crash diet because she had gained 25 pounds while living at the ranch, and her blonde hair had been re-dyed flame red. The movie was a success. Fox had a hard time finding another film for Clara after Call Her Savage. Clara would have been happy if they had never found another one, but she knew that she had to do 2 films for Fox. So Clara and Rex were stuck in Hollywood for a while. They moved into the Bel Air mansion of the producer Louis Lewin and his wife Marin Mack while they were house hunting. But it wasn't just Clara and Rex that Louis and Marin were housing. They were also housing Clara's father, her cousin Billy, and Billy's twin son and daughter. Marin thought that Clara was funny, but she was not a fan of cooking for and cleaning up after the rest of her family. Clara and Rex, Louis and Marin, played a penny-a-point bridge game. Rex wasn't giving the game his all, and Clara got mad. Clara then poured a pot of spaghetti on Rex's head, ruining Louis and Marin's $750 couch. A year after Call Her Savage, Fox found another film for Clara. The movie was an adaptation of the Broadway play The Barker. The movie was titled Hoopla. Clara hated it, but she just wanted to be done with it, so she agreed to do the film. Clara was sure that critics were going to hate the film as much as she did, but she was wrong. It was proof that Clara could still have an acting career, but she was done. People told her that she couldn't return to film, and she returned to the movies to prove that she could, and she did that. Now Clara wanted to be a housewife and mother. This is what Clara had to say about her career, quote, "My life in Hollywood contained plenty of uproar. I'm sorry for a lot of it, but not awfully sorry. I never did anything to hurt anyone else. I made a place for myself on the screen, and you can't do that by being Mrs. Alcott's idea of a little woman." End quote. Clara retired from acting for good in 1933. Rex went on to be a lieutenant governor of Nevada. Together, Clara and Rex had two sons. Tony Belden, born on December 16th, 1934. He would later change his name to Rex Anthony Bell Jr. And another son, George Belden Jr., born in 1938. Clara and Rex opened up a cafe in the Hollywood Plaza Hotel in September of 1937. They called the cafe the It Cafe. It closed in 1943. Clara did make one more public performance after she retired. It was in 1947, and it was on the radio show Truth or Consequences. She was the mystery voice in the show's Mrs. Hush contest. I really, really wanted this story to have a happy ending. In terms of sadness, I feel like Clara's story is right up there with Catherine Howard and Virginia Woolf's. And both of those stories did not have a happy ending. So, I really wanted this one too. But I am sad to say that it does not. Clara started showing signs of mental illness. She became socially withdrawn even from Rex. But even though she was not socializing with Rex, she would not let him leave the house alone. I told you earlier that Rex got into politics. In 1944, Rex was running for the U.S. House of Representatives. Clara was terrified of living a public life again, so Clara tried to kill herself. Clara said in her suicide note that she preferred death to a public life. In 1949, she checked into the Institute of Living. She was there to be treated for chronic insomnia and abdominal pains. She received shock treatment and many psychological tests. The doctors diagnosed Clara with schizophrenia, though Clara never had any hallucinations. Clara's symptoms did include an inability to reason, poor judgment, and inappropriate or bizarre behavior. It is believed that the stress to be the best housewife and mother was just too much, and that is what exacerbated Clara's schizophrenia. Clara spent months at the Institute of Living. There at the Institute of Living was where Clara let everything that she was suppressing go. She talked about her grandfather dying. She talked about her father raping her. She talked about the days that her mother was a prostitute. She said that she could remember her mother bringing home strange men. Her mother would call all of the men uncle. Her mother would then lock Clara in a cupboard-sized closet and would warn her not to make a sound until uncle was gone. Clara would be alone in the dark closet with roaches and rats. She would close her eyes tight and put her fists over her ears, and she would escape to an imaginary world while her mother and uncle had sex, making noises that, to a young Clara, sounded strange and scary. She would be happy, though, when her uncles came over because after they left, her and her mother always had enough money to eat. And it made Clara feel proud to be a part of a big family. When girls teased her about her stammer, she would tell them that she had more uncles than all of them. She would, of course, later realize that those were not her uncles, but instead they were her mother's Johns. There was irony that the woman that called her daughter a whore because she wanted to be an actress was a prostitute. Clara explained this away by saying that her mother did it because she loved her. When it was time to be released, due to her mental illness, Rex decided that Clara could not come home. He told their sons that their mother would not be coming home. By then, they were used to their mother's absences. They were separated from her for 4 months in 1940, 18 months in 1943 to 1945, and 10 months in 1949 to 1950. Both of their sons agreed to go to military school in Los Angeles. Clara would also live in a bungalow there, and she barely left her home. And Rex rented an apartment in Las Vegas. He sold their ranch. Clara was angry and hurt that her husband had abandoned her and took away her children. Her mother told her that she would be abandoned by a man, and Rex had fulfilled the prophecy. Before Clara moved into her bungalow in Los Angeles, she lived in an apartment, but she moved from that because she didn't want to be seen by anybody. But living alone became a struggle for Clara, and her doctor, Dr. Carl von Hagen, committed her to the Southern California Sanitarium. There, Clara was weaned from barbiturates, but she still suffered from insomnia. Her doctor reluctantly prescribed her sedatives, but Clara still could not sleep. Her doctor gave her a regimen of reading, swimming, and avoiding stressful situations, and no socializing, drinking, or drugs. Clara adored her doctor. Clara died of a heart attack on September 27, 1965, in Culver City, California. She was 60 years old. She is buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Los Angeles, California. Rex had also died of a heart attack 3 years prior on July 4th, 1962. When Clara died, she lived alone with a nurse. Supposedly, Clara was watching an old Gary Cooper Western when she died. Clara has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It is located at 1500 Vine Street. She also was on a U.S. postage stamp in 1994. There was a segment about Clara in the TV documentary Hollywood, a celebration of the American silent film. Kevin Brownlow made that documentary, and he also wrote The Parade's Gone, a book on silent films, and did not include Clara. He did include Louise Brooks, and she wrote to him, quote, "You brush off Clara Bow for some old nothing like Brooks. Clara made 3 pictures that will never be surpassed: Dancing Mothers, Man Trap, and It," end quote. Kevin explained that the reason why that he didn't include Clara in his book was because he couldn't get an interview with Clara. Clara was played by Jennifer Tilly in the movie Return to Babylon. Margot Robbie plays a fictionalized character that is based on Clara in the movie Babylon. The lead character, Pepe Miller, in the film The Artist, was inspired by Clara's screen mannerisms. Silver Bullet Entertainment and MJW Media announced on July 5th, 2016, that they were producing a film based on David Sten's biography, Clara Bow, Runnin' Wild. I used that as a source, and it is excellent. I would not have gotten 3 episodes about Clara without it. In the musical of the I Sing, an autograph photo of Clara is given as a consolation prize of a beauty contest. Clara inspired the name of the character Laura Bow in the video games The Colonel's Request and The Dagger of Amun-Ra. In the musical Bonnie and Clyde, there is a song titled Picture Show, and it mentions Clara and the It Girl. The cartoon character Betty Boop's look was modeled after Clara, and Clara has inspired musical artists. The band 50 Foot Wave has a song off of their self-titled debut album titled Clara Bow. Clara Bow is mentioned in Prince's song Condition of the Heart from his album Around the World in a Day. And Taylor Swift has a song titled Clara Bow. It is track 16 on Taylor's 11th studio album, The Tortured Poets Department. And that was the life of Clara Bow. Thank you so much for listening to the 9th episode of the 5th season of History Shelf. Next week's episode is going to be about Bonnie Parker. I hope you come back for that. A few things before we go. If you want to follow this podcast on social media, the TikTok is at History Shelf. The Instagram is at history_shelf_pod. The Twitter is at History Shelf Pod, and the Facebook page is History Shelf Podcast. If you want to help out this podcast financially, there are a few ways you can do that. One is you can buy merch from the History Shelf merch store, or you can become a Patreon. This podcast is always going to be free, but there are some perks that come with becoming a Patreon. The first tier is called History Student, and that is $1 a month. And with that, I will give you a shout out on all social media platforms that History Shelf is on. I will also choose one Patreon at random for each episode I do, and at the end of the episode, I will give that Patreon a shout out. The second tier is called History Fan, and that is $3 a month. And with that, you get the first tier, plus you get to vote in a poll that helps me choose the theme for the next season of this podcast. The third tier is called History Buff, and that is $20 a month. And with that, you will get a handwritten note of thanks mail to you from me, plus you will get the first 2 tiers. And the last tier is called History Lover, and that is $40 a month. And with that, you get the first 3 tiers, plus you get to choose one item from the History Chef merch store. You can choose any item that you want except for the Zippa pudding. You can also take out ad space on this podcast. I have a gig on Fiverr that lets you do that. Also, you can click on one of the affiliated links and buy something. There's one for Amazon, Riverside, and Bookshop. And if you buy something from one of those links, that helps support the podcast. But if you don't want any of the merch or any of the perks and you don't want to buy anything, but you still want to help support the podcast, I have turned on listener support on Spotify for podcasters. The links to everything that I just mentioned will be in the show notes. But as always, the best way that you can help support this podcast is just to continue to listen to it. And there are a few other ways that you can help out this podcast for free. One is if you are listening on a platform that lets you rate this podcast 5 stars and or leave a positive review. If you do that, that would be very helpful. Also, sharing this podcast on social media with your friends and family would be very helpful. Alright, well, until next time, keep learning, keep loving history, and come back for next week's episode. Bye.